if the 49ers had never called Bain and Company, or was it Bain Capital?
Bain
whoever,
Company, yeah.
If they had never called to say we need some help with a draft project, would you be working in football right now?
Probably not. I may be at IMG or a sports agency or something like that, or totally out of sports. Maybe at Nike or totally out of sports. Yeah, but most definitely, I can't imagine how I'd be here.
That's pretty crazy when you really think about it, how your career's turned out.
Yeah, everything's a series of chances and good fortune, and you always you want to set yourself up, but a lot of it is right place at the right time. The fact that I had a sports background when I was at Bain. Bain's not like a sports company, right? It's a management consulting firm. But because I love sports, I interned at IMG my 3 years when I was at Cal. So that made me the sports guy. So anytime Bain got a sports project, I was the kid that was put on the team, right? So it's a combination of a hell of a lot of good luck, but also like I'd done what I could to put myself in position to.
I always wonder this. Are you more likely when you wake up to watch CNBC or like the NFL Network?
Definitely NFL Network.
You got Peter Schrager.
Yeah, well, actually, but I'm probably neither because I don't really watch a whole lot of TV. But like I definitely will devour all my sports info before I get any of my news.
Yeah.
But do you think that I saw a quote from an article about you in 2005. It was Kirk Reynolds. Kirk Reynolds at the time said that the worst place you could have a Stanford MBA is the NFL, like that, in the sense that it doesn't get the respect that maybe it gets everywhere else. But that was 13 years ago. Things have changed. Like, you don't think in 2008, if you're still working at Bain, you would have thought, look at all these guys going to the NFL. Maybe I will work as an executive in sports.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Stanford's probably not going to like me saying this, but like a lot of times in pro sports, like you wear your degree, like the MBA are like the scarlet letters that you wear around. Like it's not something that you talk about often because it's all about whether you can get the job done, right? It doesn't really matter whether you have 1 degree, 6 degrees, or no degrees. It just matters if you can get the job done. I didn't get an MBA because I thought it would help me move on in the NFL or in pro sports. I got it because I'd already applied before Coach Walsh and Terry and the gang asked me to come work for the Niners. So it's sort of something that was already in the works. Honestly, if it had come like 3 months earlier, I probably wouldn't have done it.
One thing that's pretty crazy is like the NFL. If you had to rank them, obviously baseball with Billy and just the explosion of that. Now that's what they want. And basketball's definitely transitioned. Yeah. I know you got a buddy, Sam Hinkie, we got to talk about it a little later. But football is probably still the last, even though it's kind of come a long way. I mean, I worked for a guy, Howie Roseman, that, is known more as a numbers guy. And they are in Philly kind of like you guys out here, a very progressive organization. But it still feels like the NFL is definitely behind those other two sports just in the way they look at it. Like in baseball, you walk in with a Stanford MBA, I mean, you're running the organization by year 2. Yeah. In football, you may never.
Yeah. I mean, every sport's different. It's just football is a complex game in that, even the fact that the 11 guys that play defense are not the 11 guys that play offense, and it's very complicated. There's a lot of different factors. It's a very nuanced game that everybody's scheme and strategy and how they play is so different. And it's just the way the sports evolve, I guess. In the way that, sure, in baseball and in basketball, maybe there's more sort of non-traditional or non-playing executives on the team side, but like there's still a lot of opportunity in football. I mean, look, I grew up and still do the salary cap, right? And there's a lot of guys who do the salary cap and negotiate contracts aren't necessarily guys who are, old scouts or former players.
Do you think it would translate? Like if I said, Paraag, here's Major League Baseball's collective bargaining agreement, or here's the NBA's, you could do the same thing you're doing in the NFL in another sport? In hockey? For Leeds? I mean, in the EPL? Yeah, so I mean, like, it's the details of the CBA and how the cap and how player contracts are working, how they work, that's totally different. But a lot of the actual principles of negotiating and the principles of putting a team together, where all you're trying to do, whatever sport it is you're trying to make the sum of the parts greater than the individual pieces, right? And how you construct that team, that is applicable across any sport. And like the holy grail is actually building something for sustained success, where your coach and your GM
first of all, are on the same page about what they're looking for, that's something that stands the test of time, and then that matches with the guy who's doing the contracts and the salaries to make sure that you sort of are setting it up for what you want. That's the holy grail, right? The opposite is when you have a whole lot of transition year in and year out at one of those key positions, especially in a salary cap era, and you set up a team for a certain style of play with a certain head coach, and you swap that head coach out. And okay, that's great. You can set up a new system, but you have a bunch of players you drafted for an old system. You have a bunch of guys you signed for an old system that you don't just get to drop and start from scratch.
That happened with Chip, right?
Yeah, I mean, it happened 3 times over, right, here in 3 years in a row, which makes it really hard to try to build for sustained success. Fortunately, we've been in a good spot in that we have a lot of flexibility, and that was one of the things I think that made it attractive to John and Kyle to come here, is that despite a lot of that turnover, we actually had a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity for those two guys to build the team how they want to do it. And in fact, I think we've had the most turnover in the league in the last 2 years by far in terms of how many players are still, or how many players we've churned out.
So on the last one, let's talk when you ended up hiring Kyle and then John. I guess it kind of officially went the other route. John was first and then Kyle came.
Same time.
Yeah, same time.
We're partners.
When you went back on that, I think 26 days on the road, you and Jed looking.
Yeah.
You had been through it 2 years in a row. Things didn't quite go as planned. Your specific list, like Cliff Note version of what you were looking for in the guy on both sides. Because I remember with the GM, you had Gudikins and some other guys. You had a pretty good feel, and it looks like he's going to be pretty good. So you were on the right guys.
Yeah.
Your vision for what you wanted specifically, did you guys have a much better idea than the previous 2 years?
Yeah, no, I wasn't.
I guess it was different because Balky was here too.
Yeah,
so you had 2 roles.
And I wasn't really a part of it the previous year. I can't speak to that, but I can speak to what we were looking for. And I think before talking about either of the individuals, like the individual roles, I think there was a global goal, and that was to actually hire a team, 2 guys that were truly partners. Not like this GM on top of the head coach, not like this head coach on top of the GM, but 2 guys that both reported to the owner, and they came in together, and for all intents and purposes, hopefully it's 20 years from now, 25 years now, but they leave together too, right? They're in the same part of their career trajectory within the team, so that was like the first and most important thing. Also, then, what we were looking for is 2 guys who really complement each other well, right? And so what that meant, and that's why I corrected you and said we didn't really go one first, we went them together, because depending on the head coach candidate or depending on the GM candidate, it might have been a different subset. For the head coach, it might have been a different subset of ideal GMs. For head coach candidate 2, it might have been a different subset because of the complementary piece, right? What Kyle and John have that makes them work so well, besides the fact that they're so good at their respective job in terms of the skills, is that they complement each other really well personality-wise, in vision and what they're looking for and how they think about things, and being very open, honest, and direct with each other, with you guys, with the players. They just that is what works. So that was the first kind of global thing we were looking to do, in that we just wanted to make it where we had harmony, where and nothing was better exemplified that. And I think you were actually in there, where we were 0-9. I think it was after the Redskins game last year, and it was like post game. We were in Kyle's office, and Bob was there, and John and Kyle and Jed, and it was just like a relaxed. I mean, it sucked. We lost the game, but it was a relaxed, sort of confident sort of optimism about where we were going. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm just like, shoot, this is crazy, because we're 0-9. We lost 5 games in a row, by 3 points or less, and down the last play almost, and it feels different than a 13-3 season did.
You were the best 0-9 team ever.
Legitimately, yeah.
I think that was a consensus on Twitter. Everyone agreed. It was not your typical 0-9 team.
Yeah. So anyway, that was like the global piece, and then with the head coach, just wanted. Jed's talked about it a lot. He was ideally looking for an offensive mind, somebody who can help grow the offense and and find a quarterback and all that. So that was really important. And then on the GM side, the GM jobs is so different. You were just talking about Howie. He's a good buddy of mine. He has a totally different style than the old Road Dog GM scout or scout GM that also can be really successful. But the job is so different. It's so much more. It's so much bigger now. Where scouting is just one piece of it. You're looking for somebody who has vision, but who most importantly is just a natural born leader. Somebody who can inspire others. Somebody who is accountable for what he knows and doesn't know, and that's like John to a T. John is the type of guy he's so secure and confident. He knows what he's really good at, and he knows areas that are weaknesses of his, and he goes and finds people that will help supplement or augment that, and then and he'll give them praise and he'll work with. That's what makes him really good. He's just a natural born leader.
When John's name first came up, through Kyle, what was your guys' reaction? Because obviously I know when we all found it was out of left field. I mean, it couldn't have been any farther out of left field, like 500 feet left field.
That was Schefter on a Sunday night, right?
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah.
So when you first got the name and then obviously went and talked to him, I mean, clear Stanford guy, smart, highly respected, but still, I mean, that's a big jump.
Yeah.
You think it was realistic or?
Not at first, no. Until we got to know him.
Did you even want to talk to him, or you're like, we have to do our due diligence?
Yeah, no, totally want to talk to him. And he was always so articulate and insightful when he was calling games, right? So that was one thing that obviously piqued interest. And then just spending time with him, like he knows his stuff and he works at it. That was something that we wanted to make sure that that he had a vision for what he wanted it to, how he wanted to set it up. We knew that he already knows what it's supposed to look like, having been what hopefully should be in the Hall of Fame next year. But we know that he knows what it should look like. But then, how do you go about finding that? And is he committed to it? And does he want to, see it through? And those are the things that came across like flying colors. He was awesome. He just being around. I mean, I don't know how much time you guys have spent with him, but just being around him, it makes you want to be a better version of yourself.
Yeah.
We had him on the podcast. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah. I want to be like a better husband. I want to be a better dad.
Underrated for just how big he is. You're just like,
that's why we both came away
hitting you.
We both came away like, can't do that. Can't be that guy. Do you see these videos? He's up running every morning. It's just it's a lot.
That's real. That's authentic. That's who. There's no show in his game, right? That's exactly who he is.
Well, it's a level of humility that I would guess is required to have a structure that is structured this way. Like we heard Robert Saleh talking earlier about a player, and he said, we appreciate that. And usually you just say the GM's name that brought him in. He named four. He had to name four people because there's so many people we don't quite always know. Plus you that's involved in this player acquisition process. Yeah. What does it take for that to sustain? For 4 or 5 people to be the decision makers, whatever, depending on what the decision is?
It starts with the partnership with John and Kyle. It starts with those guys. Those guys are the face of this football team. Outside of the players, they are the ones who kind of set the vision, and the fact that not only neither of them are got to have the credit guys, but also that they share such a respect for each other, and respect for each other's departments and groups, and that's where it comes from. I mean, I think that's absolutely sustainable. Look, it was like I said, when we were 0-9, it was great. I look forward to much better days ahead from a wins and losses standpoint. It'll be the same.
Right when John and Kyle, that marriage came together, I think a lot of people, and I know we talked about what would be your role. Yeah. And then as it kind of materialized last year, and John gave you after free agency and how he worked with you, we're like, God, it's going to work. He was empowering everyone. Yeah. And then obviously this year you guys were full speed ahead. Yeah. And, I've heard you kind of mention some of the negotiation war stories, and felt like you and Don Yee with Jimmy went pretty well, but then some free agent guys from Jerick McKinnon. And how did that go in terms of, we'll get into negotiating contracts here in a minute, but just in terms of your communication with them, like how do you know, like what number, when I can walk away, we have to have this guy? Are you constantly going back and forth, or do you just kind of know I got to get this guy? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean it's constant communication. The three of us are when we're talking about player acquisition or a contract negotiation, like we are in lockstep on the same page.
Did that take time to develop, or
I mean, yes, it should, but it needed to happen pretty fast because these guys were hired officially after the Super Bowl last year, right? And free agency was a month and a half away. So that took a long time, which is why also that it was going to be something that it was either going to be organic and had to work, or if it wasn't, then I was cool with that too. Meaning I had to make sure I earned their trust. It wasn't going to be something that Jed was just going to say, all right, this is the guy that you're going to work with. Like if they don't want to, if it didn't work and they didn't want it to work, I'm not going to force it. It's got to be something that there's actually a strong working relationship that comes and friendship that comes organically, not forced.
Is that the most pressure you felt in a while, like just in terms of your job?
I don't know, man. I've been through so much, So like I'm good at. A lot of the other stuff is just noise. If you believe in what you do, you're confident in what you do. As long as you believe someone's going to give you a fair shot at trusting you, then you're good with it. And that's how I felt, I guess. So we were in just lockstep. I mean, every move. I remember you talked about McKinnon. I remember as competition for him heated up, and it ended up being at a pretty good deal for him. It was constant talk about calling back with these guys and getting off with the agents and getting on with John and Kyle and make sure, all right, we want to go here. We sure we want to go here. Just a lot of back and forth. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes it's, hey, if it's let us know when it's right.
It's a number, walk away.
Yeah, and but that number is also based on trust too, because they got to trust me that I'm the one setting that number. So helping them understand why, and then they decide if that makes sense.
And so I would imagine, so Jerick McKinnon being the example of that, I think we heard you say was an 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Back and forth conversation.
Yeah.
The same applies when it comes to trade value, draft value. Is there an element there where, you have done this thing you're doing for 15, 17, 18 years?
Yeah.
Does anybody know, do you know whatever your updated draft value chart, the CBA, back your hand, do you have to look at any of that stuff? Or is this immediate, not when John says, is that value? You say, yes. Yeah. 78 and 115 is value for whatever, 41.
Yeah, ballpark. Ballpark I know. I obviously need to go and confirm and stuff like that. And the values, and it changes, right? So, for example, an underappreciated part about the draft chart and the points that doesn't really get talked about much is that everything changed quite a bit with the new CBA. Right? It didn't necessarily change the draft, but it changed the values because no longer is the guy getting picked number one the highest paid player in the NFL history at his position. Right? With this whole slotted first round or the slotted draft pick contracts, totally changed the game for what picks are worth. Right? Because sometimes in the old days it was actually a winner's curse to have the top pick in the draft. I remember when Jake Long was drafted number one, 2006 or whatever year that was. Or 04, he instantly became the highest paid offensive lineman in NFL history.
Didn't Bradford get $60 million?
Yeah, Bradford was $60 million, but that one wasn't the highest ever. But that was something that you got the number one pick, but then you're paying that. So but then with the new slotted contracts and sort of the new rookie system that came in 2011, it actually totally changed the values because now you're not paying them as much, and so that actually, and we are in a world with a fixed salary, hard salary cap, right? So it's zero sum. More dollars to the top draft pick means less dollars to your veteran free agents, right? And vice versa. So that's why it actually changes over time. But it's ballpark. I have it in my head.
How often when you make a trade do you think, I just fleeced them? Be honest.
With Belichick.
You don't need to say names.
Listen, I talk about this a lot, that, that's like the worst deal that you can do, because you're not going to last in this business if all you're looking to do is fleece people, or all you're looking to do is take advantage. At the end of the day, the perfect deal, the ideal deal is one where both parties are right there on the cusp of being uncomfortably comfortable or comfortably uncomfortable, where you're kind of thinking, well, shoot, could I have gotten a little bit more, or should I have given up a little bit less, or whatever that is. I feel I'm happy to get this player, or happy to give up that, but that's when it's probably a good deal, right? And obviously some teams are. So John talked about this last year, with the Bears trade. Both of us got what we wanted. They got the quarterback that they wanted, and we got the player and the picks that we wanted. Both of us feel happy about it.
We were just talking about that at practice. I'm pretty good buddies with Matt Nagy, and I heard him say last week that he thinks Trubisky's very Alex Smith-like, and if he turns into Alex Smith, they would have given up next year's for there's no number. So at the time, because you guys got a lot of credit for that trade, it's known as a fleecing. But if Trubisky's their starter for the next 10 years, they'll look at it like a discount, right?
Yeah, and I totally don't. I don't look at it that way. I don't. I don't look at it as. I mean, like, I don't want to do a deal that that is so one-sided, because it's just not. You're not going to last in this business, and you want something that stands the test of time. Whether it stands the test of time with other trades that happen, stands the test of time with other player contracts that happen, like that's what you want, and that's part of the building blocks for sustained success.
All right. Monday, October 30th, 2017, 5:17 p.m., Adam Schefter tweets that there's a Jimmy Garoppolo trade. Bob Lang's life suddenly changes.
That's why I have him around.
Everyone's life changes, right? Yeah. When did you first when did the possibility of Jimmy Garoppolo becoming a 49er enter your mind? How far back are we talking?
I mean, it was when we were from early in 17, even during the interview process, right? You're looking at how are you going to get the team better via finding a quarterback? So you're looking at draft, you're looking at free agency, you're looking at trades. So, I mean, his name was brought up in almost every one of the interviews as a possibility, right? So that was always someone to talk about. I think John has talked about it quite a bit, that he actually made a couple efforts in March of 17 to make a run at him that were quickly rebuffed. So between January and February, sure, January and March, we're talking about it. But then you sort of shut it. We got rebuffed, you shut it down. And then it came alive again in late October.
And you get a call that says, Paraag, it's go time. Or what is that moment where it comes back to life like?
It was an interesting day. And the three of us have spent a lot of time just going through all the possibilities in terms of what it would take for us to get him, to trade for him. I mean, first, the fact that it was a possibility, right? Then it was like, what's the compensation got to be? And there's a lot of good comps that are out there, because quarterbacks have been traded quite a bit, especially ones sort of in his situation. So a lot of that day was spent just going through, like, what are all the permutations of things that we'd be willing to do to get him.
I said at the time I would have had no problem, because you guys were 0-9. Is that what you said?
I think they had one.
They were 0-8 at the time we got him.
Yeah, so, I mean, it was looking like you were getting the first, second, or third pick in this incredible quarterback draft.
Yeah.
I said I would have had no problem if Bill would have demanded the one to give the one. Would you have been okay with the one? I would imagine that. Did that ever come up? Because at the time, that first-round pick, it was looking like, I don't know if you had played was it the Giants yet? So that was a big swing game in the draft. I mean, that was a lot. We were talking about that a lot.
Yeah, I think the Giants game was right after we traded for him.
It might have been,
Yeah. But no, I mean, look, we had a lot of conversations with a lot of different permutations inside, but at the end of the day, I think the trade that happened was good, was fair for everybody.
When I pay my rent,
You can't crush Belichick.
Yeah.
You got to be very. I get it. I get it. I respect it.
absolutely. Anyway. The other element there that's different, I would imagine, that's hard to say, okay, this is what other guys have been traded for, is that there was some thought, we didn't know it at the time necessarily, but as it turned out, he was going to become the highest paid player in the NFL for a moment until Matt Ryan got his money, which I would imagine affects things to some degree.
Plus, there was this other great white shark kind of swimming out there that was going to be a free agent, that had some connections to the head coach.
Kirk Cousins, yeah. Well, that's why I'm glad you said that, because, even Kyle has kind of said, like, I didn't know necessarily what we were going to get when he was on the practice field. Like, I don't think Kyle viewed it like, Paraag, you tell me if I'm wrong, but from what he said, it seems like he didn't view it like,
he was the one.
yeah, Paraag, go give this guy $137.5 million. It didn't seem like that.
Yeah.
So when inside the building did you guys start to think, okay, you know what, this is the guy that we thought it was going to be, or at least he's enough of the guy that we thought he would be, that we're prepared to financially commit to him in this way? Yeah,
I mean, I'll start with it wasn't day one, right? Because he hadn't gotten on the field. We weren't sure, how good he was going to be. It was one of those things, and John and Kyle will talk about it. Like he earned their trust and the players' trust and belief. More importantly, belief, just through practice, and then the games came, right, when he got on the field, and that's where what does John famously say? The man was born to throw a football, or whatever. That's where he kind of earned everyone's belief, and then it was week by week. It was slowly us crossing off the other options. Like, for example, as we kept winning, the possibility of having a top 3, top 4 pick and getting a chance at one of these great quarterback draft quarterbacks, those started checking off. Like, that's not going to be an option anymore. we're cool with that, but that's not going to be an option anymore. Then you had the great white shark that you're going through that stuff, that discussion. And then in my mind, I was always
we'll see.
and then in my mind, it was just like waiting for them to give me the go, waiting for them John and Kyle to give me the go that this we want to build with this guy, and once that happened, then it was off to the races. I personally. I've just been spending a lot of time looking at, and just my experience, I've been spending a lot of time looking at the quarterbacks and the quarterback market, and not just where it's been, but where I think it's going. And certainly it's already started, and I think it's going to go even more. But just looking at that, like, it was just more about, as long as Jimmy wants to be a part of this and we want it, let's get aggressive. Let's not go down the path that could be really acrimonious, that is going to start kicking in late February or whenever that was, around the franchise tag. That just wasn't an ideal path, and that wasn't going to help us get a win-win type deal. I've known Don forever. We did BY's last deals here at the Niners together, so we go way back, and it was something that it came together.
It was going to be one of the most unique deals maybe in NFL history, because he'd only had 7 starts.
Yeah.
It was clear he was so damn good. But again, everything's based on comps, and there really is no comp. But last year, Derek, I think, got $70 million guaranteed. Was that a number that you kind of went off? You didn't know he signed before Cousins, so you didn't have Cousins' number, even though we kind of had some idea where that was going to fall. Where'd the numbers start? Because I think you guys have talked. It wasn't that crazy. It wasn't much. It wasn't tension. It was a pretty easy deal.
Yeah.
Where'd the numbers start?
Yeah, I mean,
If you want to get specific, go ahead.
yeah, I wouldn't say it wasn't easy. It just didn't get ugly, right? It was a lot. It took a lot of time.
No, damn it, bro! I got one more.
And one thing, for example, I hate doing it when it's a deal of that magnitude. I hate doing it on the phone. So there's a lot of time that was just done. I just went down there, or Don came up. There's a lot of stuff in person, just because it's just easier. It's a lot harder to say no to somebody in person, right? On the phone, you can just hang up. So that was one thing. And then it's not just Carr, it's the whole quarterback market. Looking at everybody, all the guys. I think Stafford might have been after Carr. And so you had that one too.
His number was like 92, right? Remember, it was in a different world as Derek's.
Yeah, that's right. But there's so many different structures to the deal, right? You've got your true guarantee, you got your effective guarantee, you got your average per year, you got the number of years, you got how the deal's structured, you got all of that stuff that was coming into it. But that's just like the past. You're also looking at where's the future going, right? You had Cousins coming out. You've got a handful of top quarterbacks that are nearing, having 1 or 2 years left, that are going to have to get taken care of because they're so important to their team.
Matty Ice just bought another Mercedes with that new $100 million. Mercedes
plant or car? So you got, so you're just you're trying to fit it into all that. And at the end of the day, it's one of those deals you are going to be uncomfortably comfortable, and both parties left stuff on the table, right? Both parties got things they wanted. Both parties left stuff on the table.
With the quarterbacks, though, usually when you do that deal, it seems like from the outside we view the biggest number of that deal as the number that they'll get. They'll eventually get there because of that position, generally speaking. But that wasn't the case. It's amazing. We're less than 4 years from the Collin contract, which was 126, I think was the big number.
Yeah.
But it was really $13 million in guarantees. When you put yourself back at that time, I think it was June of 2014. It was just yesterday on the calendar, but it doesn't feel like just yesterday. It feels like so long ago.
It's crazy to hear you say that.
Yeah. So how at that time, were you willing to go well beyond that when it came to guarantees, or did you in your mind think, look, we believe no matter all the stuff that came later, we don't know that stuff's going to happen, but we're not willing to go well beyond what now is what a quarterback gets for 1 year?
You're talking about back in 2014? It's just all about trade-offs, right? You're making trade-offs. So at that time, there's different player, different body of work, different sort of different team structure, and how the team was built. But it's all trade-offs, right? So, on one end you may be light in one area, like you mentioned, but that made up for it in what the average per year could have been if we continue to play really well, right? So it all comes down to trade-offs. And at the end of the day, most important position is the quarterback, right? And you either have one or you don't. And there's definitely fewer than 32 teams that think they have one, right? And so at the end of the day, it's whether you're talking about 20 or 22 or 27 or 30, it's almost rounding error, right? Because it's just you either have one or you don't.
Well, obviously, when you're typically dealing with a player, you're talking with their agent. And so if you have to be negative, you're going through them. There's an area of separation.
Yeah.
You just did a deal where the guy was sitting right next to you, a pretty famous guy. And that deal, it came pretty quick. And I think you've gone on record in saying how impressed you were with Richard.
Yeah.
Clearly, Stanford guy, another Stanford guy around here. What was that whole thing like? Did you have to say anything negative to Richard? Like, Richard, we ain't going there. Or anything that Richard had to take a step back? Or did he tell you? Because I think you've said how impressed you were with how many contracts that he had looked back upon and he had spent time studying. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely unique.
Not small. I just saw it in practice.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time. He spent a lot of time doing his homework, but it was. How do I describe it? It was never acrimonious. It was never it never got ugly. His fiance Ashley was there, John was there, and it was just the four of us were always just having productive conversation. There's one time where I, like you said earlier, it's all about comps, right? You're not just picking a number out of the sky. You got to find comps, and there happened to be a player of Pro Bowl, All Pro caliber, who was a veteran like Richard was, who has switched teams and done a new deal. And the guy had made a lot of all pros and Pro Bowls, and so I brought his name up, and Richard immediately cut me off and was like, "Don't even make that comparison. We're not even in the same stratosphere." And I was like, "Oh man!" And I didn't. And,
You're like, "Damn, I thought Deion Sanders was pretty good."
And then Lynch quickly diffused the situation. I can't remember what joke he had, but he had a good one.
I told you not to bring up Revis.
Richard was pretty serious.
Yeah, he was totally serious. Yeah, and I'm like, "Oh man!" And this was kind of early on, and so that was probably the most tense it got. But it was totally. I mean, it was one of those things. If he wants to be here, we want him here, and we're in person, right? So there's an example of one where if he didn't appreciate that comparison, you hang up, and you don't know if you're talking the next day, 2 days later, 3 days. But we were there, right? And with a goal, and it was actually John who was focused on making us get it done today or that day. And telling Richard the same, because there's one point where he's like, well, maybe I got to go sleep on it. And it's looking good, but I got to go sleep on it and let's do it in the morning. And John's like, nope, let's finish this. What do we need to do to close this out now?
Wow. Don't let him off the lot without the car.
Yeah, exactly.
That's incredible. All right, let's talk about, I want to ask you about the game management chart.
Yeah.
Does it exist? Is it the same one for every coach? How much input do you have on it? What can you tell us about a game management chart?
Well, let's not call it a chart, right? It's more just there's just different things that you could. There's different. How do I say it? There's different black and white things about the chess part of the game that you can apply in situations that don't have to do that are not subjective, right? There's some empirical things about what the odds say here or there, or actually, more appropriately, when to use a timeout. For example, if you're trying to use timeouts, there are times where if you use one, you're completely wasting it, meaning it actually either cost you time or saved you 0 seconds, meaning you just completely wasted it. And it's all, I won't go into details, but it's all around the difference between a play clock and the game clock, right? You got a 40-second play clock and then the game clock, and then how that operates around the 2-minute warning. And how many you got how long a play is, you got the intervals between plays, and so there's some rules that are around there. And in that, I'll present it to the head coaches that we've had, and if they are bought in on it and if they want it, then great. Then let's coach them up on it and get them to be able to apply some of those things and every coach has wanted to learn about it and use it.
So it's not a chart? What does it look
Well,
like?
yeah, I mean, yeah, the form can come out in the form of a chart, but that's not necessarily how each coach wanted to consume it, if you know what I mean. Like sometimes maybe they wanted a guy to just tell them. Sometimes they wanted a chart right in front of them. You know, some of our coordinators who have gone on to become head coaches have taken the chart and still use it, the one that we did way back when.
How does Kyle consume it?
I think I'm not sure how much Kyle's talked about it, but we have a guy. Oh yeah, he has talked about it. He talks about him. Cordell. He doesn't know his first name. He calls him Cordell.
He's always right next to him.
That's right. So so he relies on him, and it's like an extra piece. And especially with the black and whites, right? Yeah. The stuff that is just empirically there that is not up to subjectivity.
I'd be fascinated, like in baseball, for example, like the A's are famous for it. Like in the 8th inning, if it's this guy's up, you're best off using this reliever. It's it's pretty black and white. Or 2-1 count, look for this because this in football, even if it's the 2-minute warning, like what's the down and distance, what's the score of the game, like how's your running game? Like there's so many variables in football that are like how does a chart or just when you do break stuff like that about game stuff, how do you factor in if you are making an algorithm or however you create it, all the variables? Because it feels like of the sports, by far, football has the most variables. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it has a ton. You guys want me to give you one example of one that's wasted?
We love this stuff.
Okay, all right. So here's one example, and this mistake is made all the time, and this has nothing to do with where you are on the field, or just imagine you're trying to save time. You're on defense and you're losing, right? And you want to save time. It's in the fourth quarter, and you got 1 or 2 timeouts, and they got a first down, right? And if you just play it out, and that first down play ends at, let's say, with 2:42 left on the clock, right? And you use your second timeout, right? If you just play out how first, second, third down goes, based on where the 2-minute warning is going to fall, that you will have effectively created like 2 seconds from that timeout, effectively wasted the timeout
Before the 2-minute warning.
because you have fewer stoppages than they have intervals between downs. Because like if you had a timeout left, all you got is your timeout and the 2-minute warning, and they got 3 opportunities to burn clock, right? So you want to make sure that you're burning as much clock as you can around when the 2-minute warning is going to hit, right? Because, for example, in that scenario, you call it at some point they're going to be able to burn off 38 seconds of time, and so we don't have to walk through it. But if you just use that example and like you go at home and you do what does second down, third down look like, you'll see that if versus using it later, you actually cost yourself time by using it. And that's just like a black and white.
The high school coaches can use that. Pop Warner coaches could be using the same theories.
I'm sure a lot do, but there are some who don't.
Yeah. Were you doing the stuff that now everyone calls just the pro football focused data, the grading of those individual plays that the statistics don't necessarily measure? Were you guys doing that stuff early on here?
I think every club is doing that. I mean, the whole stats and analytics, like all those phrases have become bad words. But everybody's doing some version of that, right? Every pro scouting staff, every college scouting staff, every quality control coach you're forming your own grades that are based on film review, stats, production, everything. So yeah, every club is doing some version of it.
I know Howie talked about, what did he call it? Not the sabbatical, but he called his year away. He had a word for it.
It wasn't sabbatical?
No, something. And he went.
His year at the other end of the hall?
Yeah, and he went to meet with, from Popovich's group or RC's group to soccer teams. Yeah. Obviously, you've never had a sabbatical, but you're friends with a lot of people in other leagues. Yeah. How much time do you spend, bouncing? I remember when I was at practice 3 or 4 years ago, and Sam Presti was here, and guys to just around basketball or baseball, or obviously you're involved with soccer, to just throwing ideas or gaining ideas or just bouncing things off them or going to clinic or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just all around like get a different perspective and a fresh idea. I actually talked about this in an interview for Leeds last week when they were asking me about how much would I be able to help on like the player transfer market and the player compensation side. And my answer was just like, all right, I don't know. Of course, I don't know how the market works there. I'm a total second grader when it comes to knowledge of how salaries and player contracts work in European soccer versus here. But what I do have is a lot of contract experience and player compensation experience. And so I'm probably going to ask 10 dumb questions. But my 11th question might be something that someone hasn't thought about. But based on my background and experience that's somewhat related, it might give us a fresh perspective. And so I'm going to keep doing that because, if I ask 100 questions, then we might come up with 10 that can get us to really good answers. So that's the same thing here around I am and we are always looking for ways that we can get better. And why does it have to be limited to just what good NFL teams do, right? Sport is still sport, and you're still trying to build a team and trying to build something where the sum of the parts are greater than the individual pieces. You can take examples from basketball, from baseball, from hockey, from business, from a lot of different places and try to apply it here.
I don't think you'd like doing a Machado or Bryce Harper type deal when they just said, Scott Boras says, we're $400 million, we ain't going under that.
I was going to say, what would happen in the NFL, and I don't know soccer that well either, so somebody can correct me on this. Maybe you can correct me on how this works. But if they just said, you know what, you can rent Phillip Rivers for $200 million from the Chargers. There's going to be a whatever they call it, a loan or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
And you could just buy, what would happen in the NFL if you could just borrow players or buy players from other teams during the season or in the offseason for massive sums of money?
Cowboys would do it a lot.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. The fact that we have a fixed hard salary cap is the one great equalizer in the NFL, right? In that every single dollar spent at some point in time is going to hit your salary cap. You can only credit card finance for so long. You can only front load for so long. I mean, at some point, every dollar is going to hit your cap. So it's a totally different market. And like I talked about, and that's where what makes it really hard is when you have a lot of transition, because you don't get the opportunity in the NFL to just press reset and say, all right, I got a wealthy owner, I got a brand new stadium, and we're going to let's discard what we had and start from scratch. We don't get to do that, and so, that we have examples that you guys can think about recently where, we maybe signed an extension on a player from a previous regime, which wasn't too long ago, right? And then that player doesn't fit the system here, and we have to eat that. We have to eat that contract, at least the money that has been already paid. You don't get to just start over.
You just hope your cap guy hasn't signed a bunch of bad contracts.
No. See, I argued, I don't know when, I read this maybe a couple months ago, that they're still paying Tony Romo. They paid Tony Romo last year. He was dead cap on their, on the Cowboy salary cap, even though he's been retired. He's calling their games. Yeah. And I'm like, this is stupid. If you retire, and a lot of people on Twitter came back to me, actually, it was pretty fair. And I started thinking, I would imagine you fall, that it probably is fair because they kept pushing it back so they could sign other people. That's right. It's part of the deal. You eventually have to pay the credit card.
Every dollar spent has to hit your cap. Yeah, every dollar. Well, and that's why. If you look over, you have the higher spending teams or teams with people always talk about that. But if you look at any 5 or 6 year window of teams or any period of time, you'll see that everybody spent pretty much the same. Over a longer period of time, the teams will have a big blip and then a low point, but over a chunk of time, it all averages out because we have a fixed salary cap.
How are we doing on time? You good?
Yeah.
You good? All right. Negotiating, sitting across the table or being on the phone, or whether it's a player like Richard or Jerick McKinnon's agent, or maybe what about if it's an agent you haven't worked with before? How did you...
Number one negotiator, USA Today.
I know. So that's what maybe there's a political post for you. You could represent the country and try to calm some things. But how did you develop that skill?
How did I develop the skill? I guess I've always been combative debate, liking debate, liking making my points and standing up for them. A lot of times it frustrates my wife, but it's just sort of how I am, how I'm wired, I guess. I love finding common ground and finding agreement through something that looks really hard to do. I love the competition of that. And also, I've always been a big believer in that. It's not in an ideal successful negotiation. It's not about what you got or what the numbers were. It's about how you feel about what you got. That is to me that is the most important thing. And so I always try to, it's important to me that I feel good about it. It's important to me to make sure that the agent and the player feel good about it, right? There's been some famous examples in the past where maybe a player or, that people might crush a deal, and I hate that. Because that means that I failed at my job because it didn't stand the test of time where everybody felt good about it. And that's sort of like my guiding principle a lot of times when I go into it. And it's not like something I'm actively thinking about, but it's more subconscious, where it's not just about what you got, it's about how you feel about what you got.
What was your first negotiation?
I'll tell you, my first one that was a big deal was 2005. Alex Smith, number 1 pick contract. I was 24 years old or whatever I was, 27 years old. And it was me and it was Tom Condon. And, and he was like the number 1 agent in football. I mean, still one of the best ones. And, there's like a little intimidation. And at that time we were seeing you could negotiate with a player before if you're the number 1 pick, you can negotiate a contract before the draft. So we actually had 3 of the guys in, and I was trying to negotiate and see which of the deals we can get and which one which ones worked the best. And actually, 2 of the 3 we actually got a deal done with, and we could have drafted that player and had a deal done. And the one we didn't was Alex Smith. And I remember Tom flew out, and I did like a PowerPoint, and I showed him on the screen, like here's all the prior number 1 picks. Here's Eli Manning from last year, and therefore here's where I think Alex Smith should be. And like in a total big time move, and Tom had just flown out from Kansas City, and a total big time move. He was just like, "All right, is that it?" And I was like, "Yeah." So do you want to? Shall we start? Let's get rolling. Let's roll up our sleeves. He's like, "No, I'm good. I'm done. Think I can use your gym?" And I was like, "Okay." So he uses the gym, and he goes to the airport and takes off, and he goes home. I'm like, "Wow, okay, he just totally big timed me." And then keep going on that story. Then one thing I had learned that this is where I learned the lesson the hard way is if a player has an agent, you can't negotiate with them or do anything with them. And I remember I was in the lunch line during minicamp or something with Alex. I'm like, "Hey man, we're trying hard to get you signed." Something as innocuous as that, right? And then Tom sent me a cease and desist letter from IMG saying per section blah 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 of the CBA, when a player has an agent, you cannot negotiate directly with them. I was like, man, this guy's pulling out all the stops.
Cease and desist what? Your career?
I mean, that had to be, your heart had to drop when you saw that headline.
Yeah, it was Tom Condon. It was a guy I read about. So that was my first big deal.
Obviously now, I mean, you deal with 7 figures and $1 million contracts in all walks of life. Yeah. But when the first time, Cal, Stanford, everything's in theory and doing these deals, but then you actually do whatever player, $1 million, a 7-figure contract. I mean, are you pretty nervous when you're dealing with that much money? I mean, you negotiate the amount of money, or how does that was there a transitional period where you're like, okay, I got this? Because now you probably do deals that are still hard or whatever, take time, but you're comfortable doing them.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm nervous about the amount. I'm used to it.
Though?
No, not really. You know what I was nervous about? I was nervous that it's not as simple as just saying what the number is and you just write it on a little yellow pad. I was nervous about making sure that the contract reflected everything that we wanted it to in the deal. There's so many nuances of a deal. I remember Alex Smith's contract was like 80 or 90 pages of words that are supposed to then ultimately represent the numbers and the dollars he gets, right?
Paragraph 5 is the only thing that matters, right?
So that's where, and you got, the deals are complicated now. You got voids and buybacks and offsets and guarantees and option bonuses and roster bonuses and this and that. So all the bells and whistles to make sure that there wasn't any loophole. And you guys have seen there's been some public examples of, a club forgot to send in the void notice, and it happened with Elvis Dumervil, right, with the Broncos and Ravens, stuff like that. That's what probably I'm still nervous about, is making sure that it all represents what we want it to.
I want to go back to the draft for a second, though. So was Aaron Rodgers one of the 2 players you would agree to a contract with?
I don't even remember if that's public or not. But yes, he was one of the guys in consideration, and his agent at the time was Mike Sullivan, who's now the cap guy for the Broncos. So yeah, we had a good time.
Was that an easier deal to get? I mean, that obviously was an easier deal to get done. Was it at that time, watching Aaron fall was, I don't know if it was shocking to the league. You go through and you see there weren't the teams that needed quarterbacks, there weren't a ton of them, but it was definitely difficult for him. When it came down to it, was that when it came down to making that pick, how close was it in the draft room?
I don't remember. It was so long ago. I don't remember how close. It was obviously something that Mike Nolan and Scott and Mike McCarthy talked about for a long time, and a lot of days, and they did the private workouts with both those guys. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I don't remember how close it came, but it was definitely down to those two guys.
Paraag got the deal done, John. That's all that matters.
What about coaches' contracts? That's obviously changed a lot, and not just the head coach, but these assistants now make a lot of money. I mean, I would imagine you've seen that skyrocket. Do you negotiate? I know you deal with the head coach, the assistants too, and a lot of them, I'm sure, have agents. How has that changed?
That's actually one thing right there that's changed quite a bit. Is back even a decade ago, assistant coaches didn't have agents.
So would you take a linebacker coach to the woodshed in a negotiation?
No, it's always win-win. Everyone's got to feel good. But now a lot of these guys, including position coaches, have agents.
Any quality control guys yet? I've heard of some stories of when they're making the transition from quality control to position. These agents are trying to get them on the come up.
Yeah, a lot of times it's more like an agent helping out a young guy, and hoping that the guy continues to develop. But most of these guys do. They do have a representation. Yeah.
What about situations where a GM and a potential coach have the same agent? The Indianapolis was an interesting case study this year. But, how do you navigate that? I don't know if you've been in that situation, but does that create a complication for a team?
I'm trying to think if we had a situation like that. I think we've had one, but no, I don't think it's necessarily complicating. I'll tell you what was unique and interesting is like this year, for example, one coach's agent had like five of the coaching candidates that were out interviewing. So that makes it interesting because it's like that guy then may want to just place people in certain places and sets it up that way. But it hasn't really been a conflict.
All right, last thing. John and I love pizza, and your family owned a Round Table Pizza and a Mountain Mike's Pizza, right?
Yeah.
And you were working, from everything we've heard and read, at a very young age and hiring people by the time you were 14. I mean, whiz kid at 24, you're a whiz kid at 14.
A little different than Middlekauff upbringing, huh?
Yeah, I was eating a lot of pizza. I couldn't make my own pizza, let alone run a pizza place. But give us your expertise on pizza, the best kind, your favorite kind, best place, all that. Give us a pizza breakdown if you could.
So the best way for me, I grew up eating pizza too. I mean, I ate probably 8-9 pizzas a week. I ate a lot of pizza growing up.
How do you look like this?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but I ate a lot of pizza growing up.
He's on the Robert Saleh workout plan.
So I'll say this, like the one thing I always like to do is order the same thing at every place because otherwise I can't compare, right? So like somebody who has like a thick crust or a stuffed crust or this and all the gimmicks, I just want like a plain pepperoni thin crust pizza. Yeah. And that's how I can compare pizza to pizza. And then I think it all comes down to the quality of the sauce. Sauce is key.
Who's the best in the Bay Area?
Oh man, that's close. That's interesting. There's a lot of good. I mean, Round Table is still an OG classic. Round Table is really good. There's a place right around the corner from me that just opened up in Los Altos that I love. State of Mind Pizza. That place it's a good family place, so we go there a lot.
You ever been to Tony's in North Beach?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, good pizza. Really good pizza.
Great pizza. All right, Paraag, thank you for the time.
Yeah, of course.
We appreciate it. Best of luck this season.
Appreciate it.
Any players on the block that you can discuss on the way out?
And Bob Lane cuts it off.